We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Diana Madsen. I'm the Executive Director with the Mountain Pact. And a few housekeeping items before we jump in. Everybody is automatically muted. And so if you'd like to ask a clarifying question during the presentation or any questions outside of that during the Q&A portion at the end, please feel free to either raise your hand. There in the GoToWebinar chat window, there should be an option to raise your hand and we can unmute you. In addition to that, you can also use the question box in the GoToWebinar window to ask questions throughout. And again, we'll be taking clarifying questions during the presentation, and then we have a good chunk of time opened up for Q&A at the end. So with that, let's jump in. So again, my name is Diana Madsen. I'm the founder and executive director of the Mountain Pact. And with me, we have Maddie Wren, who is the project director for the Mountain Pact. Maddie is based in Colorado, while I'm in South Lake Tahoe, California. So today we're going to cover first just a quick overview of the Mountain Pact. Then we'll move into campaign updates / policy updates specific to what the Mountain Pact has been working on. And then we'll move into new policy opportunities in 2016. So this will be a list of about 10 policies that are of interest to mountain communities with the overlap of climate change impacts or climate change resilience support, public lands, conservation, etc. And so these policies are just a taste of some that are in a full spreadsheet that we'll be sending as follow-up to this webinar with a little bit more just high-level information, but on more policies focusing on overview of what it is, who's affected, why it's relevant to mountain communities, and information to learn more. And then lastly, we'll jump into a question and answer period at the end. The Mountain Pact is a nonprofit effort designed to inform, educate, empower, and mobilize mountain communities in the American West around federal policies related to climate change and public lands. The Mountain Pact was started in early 2014 and really designed to respond and provide mountain communities with a voice at the federal government level at a time when the Obama administration was pushing through a host of new climate change related policies around both mitigation, that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as on the adaptation side, which is preparing communities for the impacts of climate change. And we found that coastal communities, urban areas were very active in those conversations, and the Mountain Pact was designed to get mountain communities a seat at the table. And so in the 2 years since, we've evolved to also provide policy analysis to our communities, so you will have an overview of what is out there, because a lot of the stuff can be pretty wonky and varied sometimes. And in addition to that, we also dig in on 3 to 5 different campaigns per year, so actually identifying these policies that we think are the most relevant and the most potential for impact, and providing letters, working with communities on op-eds, and really making sure the local communities in the Mountain West are heard. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maddie to talk a little bit about some campaign updates and policy updates on the mountain in terms of what the Mountain Pact has focused on in 2015 and 2014.
Okay, thank you, Diana. We can go to the next slide. So let's dive right in. One of our more active campaigns has been working on the coal royalty reform. Throughout the last year, the Department of Interior has been exploring reforms to the valuation of coal on public lands. The Mountain Pact has been in support of reforms that ensure American taxpayers are receiving their fair share by modernizing policies that close loopholes that are costing taxpayers in Western states more than $1 billion a year in lost royalty payments. This is relevant to mountain communities because in the face of climate change, mountain communities are shouldering the burden of adaptation and mitigation costs, well, coal companies are able to exploit outdated policies and loopholes, having to pay less. And so our campaign included partnerships with 11 mountain communities, including many of you on the line, who helped submit a letter to the Department of Interior in May supporting the proposed ruling to increase the royalty rate. We also participated in BLM listening sessions in late August with 4 town representatives offering public testimony, sharing the impacts that climate change is having on their communities and the need to account for that in the federal coal program. Following those listening sessions in August, we sent in written comments to the agency with support of 10 mountain communities, again urging them to consider the costs of climate change and coal leases. As well, many communities we worked with published op-eds on the subject throughout the nation. And after all those efforts, the beginning of this month marked a monumental victory for the campaign. It started out when President Obama acknowledged the need to transition away from dirty fuels in his State of the Union address. And then days later, Secretary Jewell made a historical announcement calling for a comprehensive review of the federal coal leasing program. This was huge, and she placed an emphasis on the need to look at coal's cost of carbon, taxpayers' fair share, and a moratorium on new leases until the review is complete. So this was great news for us, and we will continue to follow and make sure, follow up with them and make sure their commitments are being made. Next slide. Another one of our more active campaigns has been the Wildfire Funding Act. This would create an emergency funding process for fire response for the Department of Interior and U.S. Department of Agriculture. If passed, this bill would not only ensure funding for wildfire suppression, but it would redirect large amounts of funding for federal land managers to continue with important activities such as wildfire prevention, forest health, and recreation infrastructure. Currently, if the Department of Interior or USDA has to expend more money than their annual wildland firefighting budgets allow, they must take or borrow that funding from other forestry and conservation programs. This proposal would free up as much as $412 million in discretionary funds for fire prevention programs such as hazardous fuel removal and limit such fire borrowing. In 2015, there was progress made when the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on the Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies included important language on wildfire funding in the fiscal year of 2016's appropriation measure. Among many other provisions in the bill, it provides a total of $3.61 billion to fight wildland fire, which is 100% of the 10-year average. So this is a step in the right direction, but we still need to work on making sure that our public land agencies have money to do their congressionally mandated activities. Next slide. So the ski area water rights, there were amendments added to the Special Uses Handbook for the Forest Service, addressing the sufficiency of water for operation of ski areas on national forest lands. Specifically, the final directive provides direction related to the treatment of ski area water rights on national forest lands through the permitting process. The final directive contains 2 clauses for ski water rights that are split up by the different sides of the nation. So eastern states follow the riparian doctrine, meaning that water rights belong to the land. This is different, whereas western states will follow a prior appropriations doctrine, meaning that water rights can be severed from the land. This was an unfortunate decision for the Mountain Pact stance. We were advocating against this because as water becomes a more scarce resource, it would be detrimental to have those rights sold off. We will be sending out an email update in the next couple of days with more details on this ruling. Next slide. Secretary Jewell announced on December 15th that the department will establish a natural resource investment center to spur partnerships with the private sector to develop creative financing opportunities that support economic development goals while advancing the department's resource stewardship mission. This announcement came out of a White House roundtable on water innovation, where Secretary Jewell outlined that the center will use market-based tools and innovative public-private collaborations to increase investment in water conservation. This was a recent announcement, and with that, the Mountain Pact has been validating public comment and providing support for the new center. That covers it up for campaigns that we've been working on the past year, and so now I'll turn it over to Diana to walk through some opportunities for the upcoming year.
Thanks so much, Maddie. And again, folks on the line, feel free to ask any questions in the question box window, or we can discuss during Q&A. So along the same lines as the what Maddie just talked about with the Natural Resource Investment Center, that announcement in December marks a wave of drought resilience measures. We're rumored and hoping that the Obama administration will be rolling out as part of their legacy program in the next year. And that's something that's going to come up quite a bit across the board in this webinar, is how much the Obama administration is trying to push through on the environmental side of things before they leave. And so along the same lines as the Natural Resource Investment Center is pushing to increase federal investment across the board for drought resilience. And in the next, let's see, 10 days or so, we'll have the president's final fiscal year 2017 budget. And we're hoping, and rumors have come out, that there might be increased funding, really specifically line iteming drought resilience in the Water Smart Enhancement and Farm Bill Conservation programs. And so this would be great, and it's of interest, I think, in particular to mountain communities, because A, we really don't see drought resilience as an identified measure in the budget. And then B, while a lot of drought resilience funding, we tend to think about it as going to building large infrastructure projects like dams, there's also growing research and support for upper watershed management and forest and stream restoration, which can have a number of water quality and water quantity benefits down the road. And so if this does move forward, there is potential for that to benefit many of you who are in headwater communities. Next, we have the Outdoor Recreation Economic Contributions Act. And I've spoken with some of you about it in its previous iteration, which was a campaign called Count My Job. And this doesn't directly relate to climate change, but it has a number of benefits down the road to mountain communities, and I believe environmental and public lands funding, as I'll explain. But essentially, the current status is that the federal government, under the Bureau of Labor Statistics, does not manage or recognize the outdoor recreation industry as an economic sector. So the Outdoor Industry Association, OIA, estimates that the outdoor industry generates more than almost $650 billion a year in consumer spending and supports more than 6 million American jobs. But because it's not recognized by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it doesn't lend itself to being incorporated into a lot of policy decisions or other benefits coming out of the federal government. So the REC Act is a way to amend this and actually get the outdoor recreation world, our industry, counted by the federal government. And it was a bill introduced in November by Senator Sheehan of New Hampshire and Senator Gardner of Colorado. And from what we've heard, there is general support for it. It looks like it's something that could push through. It's just a matter at this point of allocating the estimated $1 million and actually getting this research done, which I guess may need to come through the Department of Interior or others in order to push this forward. Next, we have a outdoor recreation bill, and this has not yet been released, but Senator Wyden of Oregon put out some announcements in last fall that he's expected to release a bill this year, or early in 2016, with new public lands designation, somewhat similar to wilderness designation. So this new type of outdoor recreation public lands designation would modernize the recreation permitting. It would take into account the multiplier effect, so meeting the impact of recreation on the economy and industry for gateway communities like many of yours. And it would increase support and funding of maintenance of public land. And so, again, we don't really know quite what it's going to look like until it is released, but it seems like it could be a promising opportunity for mountain communities and other gateway communities. And of course, we have the major international agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement, that took place in December, which was a huge hurdle by the United Nations international community to come together on this commitment. In short, the Paris Climate Agreement includes almost all of the nations in the world agreeing to prevent global climate change from warming more than 2 degrees Celsius, which is the absolute threshold limit that scientists have identified. And then it also includes a goal to limit warming as well to 1.5 degrees Celsius as a sort of a short-term reach goal. And so this agreement, it just got passed, and I think a lot of the folks who are working on this are kind of just coming back up for air at this point in January. But it's critical that we make sure the U.S. maintains and meets its commitments made during the Paris Climate Agreement, so that we are able to both make sure the U.S., one of the biggest emitters in the world, is meeting its commitment, but also the U.S. has the sort of the street cred to be able to then push and pressure other countries to meet their commitment. And the relevance, this is a massive international climate agreement. It's not, it's not necessarily directly related to mountain communities, but I think in the general concern about the need to limit global climate change, this is kind of the main top-down mechanism that's going to make that happen. And also, I know we have Aspen on the line. We had Mayor Steve Skadron was in Paris and attended a number of events and was able to share the mountain community perspective there. So FEMA is currently developing a climate adaptation, preparedness, and resilience seminar series that will focus on training local authorities on climate resilience. This is a new seminar series coming out of a 2014 program called the FEMA's National Exercise Division, conducted a series of workshops with local leaders and planners looking at climate resilience with focus communities of Houston, Fort Collins, Anchorage, and North Fork. So these workshops set the stage for continued collaboration and understanding of how to incorporate climate risk into future planning. So they've expanded this into the Partnership for Sustainable Communities program. And stay tuned, they haven't released dates yet on when these trainings will take place, but they could be great opportunities for your communities to plug into and learn a little bit about climate resilience training from the perspective of FEMA. And so looking again at FEMA, but coming from the perspective of current FEMA funding structures and mechanisms, which we're finding aren't really designed to take into account the impacts of climate change. And so the existing FEMA programs don't help communities prepare for extreme weather. They're only responsive. And so on one hand, we are very much encouraging the FEMA, or we sort of as the general environmental community, and I think a growing movement is identifying, including the president, that FEMA does need to be putting money into pre-disaster planning, which will make the actual post-disaster response much cheaper and less impactful. And then secondly, when post-disaster funding is granted, FEMA has a number of regulations in place about the funding being in kind. So that is, rather than building a new bridge post a flooding disaster that can take into account the new risks we're understanding about climate change and flooding for that particular region, the funding is often restricted to just the exact same bridge that was there before, rebuilding that. And so in recent years, Obama has asked Congress for more funding for both pre-disaster hazard mitigation and improved post-disaster funding, increasing and has identified increased funding for the budget. And so we'll see where this goes, but this is something, as mountain communities tend to be at higher risk for fire and sometimes post-fire flooding, making sure that you're actually able to leverage FEMA funding to prepare and post-disaster prepare for future disasters with that funding. And in the last couple days, actually, we heard another announcement coming out of the Department of Interior. So this is a part of the big wave of legacy programs we're seeing. And this is an effort by the BLM to curb emissions and prevent waste of taxpayer dollars. And it's the long-awaited draft rule on methane pollution on public land. So the draft rule, the language will slash venting, flaring, and leaking of methane, which is the main component in natural gas, and prevent this from new and existing oil and gas operations on public lands. It would require the oil and gas industry to take measures to reduce instances of venting and flaring, to plug leaks through equipment upgrades. The rule is expected to reduce both venting and flaring by 41% and could prevent up to almost 170,000 tons of methane emissions per year. And just for your reference, methane is 21 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and so this is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. We'll see how this moves forward. We're expecting the BLM to announce listening sessions in February to hear from the public on this, and as with a number of these legacy programs, they're going to try to wrap them up by the end of the year before the next president comes in. And of course, we have the Clean Power Plan, which has been the administration's primary mechanism for reducing greenhouse gas emissions domestically. Many of you have been actively engaged in the Clean Power Plan discussions for several years now. And we pulled in this slide to really emphasize the state component, because now that the federal policy under EPA is locked in and moving forward, the responsibility now shifts to states to meet their customized emission reduction targets through their own carbon reduction plans. And so there's each state is in a different stage of this process. Colorado has been a very high-profile state in terms of its work on this, and actually had a public listening session yesterday in Denver on this issue. And so something to keep in mind, and could be an opportunity for your communities to plug in at the state level to ensure that the state version is effective and expedient. We have PACE programs here, which support, provide financing for energy upgrades. This is a fairly popular program, simple and effective to finance energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water conservation upgrades to buildings. So it can pay for new heating and cooling systems, lighting improvements, solar panels, etc. And so this program, there's not really much to update as a policy program, but wanted to put this on your radar if you're not aware of it, as it can be a nice opportunity to finance some of the renewable energy projects that may be a goal of your communities. And here is I Am Pro Snow. This is this isn't a policy at the federal level so much, but something I wanted to put on all of your radar, because you'll likely be hearing from them in the next year. And so I Am Pro Snow is a program under Al Gore's nonprofit Climate Reality, and they've just launched in 2016 a 100% committed campaign. And this will be an effort to get winter sports and mountain communities to commit to moving toward 100% clean and renewable energy. So it's a pretty neat idea. I think it's an important to be pushing these types of initiatives at a local level, and they are staffing up right now, and so I think a lot of you will be hearing from them. And if you're interested in learning more about this, let me know, and I can connect you with the campaign organizer there. And I'll likely be making some introductions throughout the year as they move forward with their effort. But it's an exciting initiative, and a number of communities have already made this commitment. So that wraps up the overview of different policies on the horizon that would be of interest. Those are, for expediency's sake, we didn't go through every single one that's on the spreadsheet. We'll be sending as follow-up, so there's more to dig in. But those were the ones of particular interest and the ones that are moving, have some general updates in 2016. But with that, the Mountain Pact is going to be focusing in Q1, so the next couple months. We're going to be continuing on the campaign side of things to push, to make sure that these coal royalty reforms that the administration announced earlier this month, which we're very excited about, but make sure that there's follow through in terms of those commitments, as well as doing a number of validating actions to thank the administration for this very historic move they've done. We'll also be advocating for wildfire and public lands funding reform, so continuing on our Wildfire Disaster Funding Act efforts in the next couple months. We'll be pushing federal investment in drought resilience. So once the new budget comes out in the next couple weeks, we'll see what drought resilience, where that played in, and look into next steps in terms of making sure those are actually funded. And then in addition to that, we are organizing a delegation of town elected officials to go to DC in April to do a series of meetings. There'll probably be 1 or 2 days, a series of meetings to meet with agency folks, so with the Department of Interior, Forest Service, as well as congressional legislators. And so to that end, we'll be sending out a little bit more information on that, but please do let me know if you are interested in being a part of this delegation. And then I have a note here at the bottom, just that if there is a policy effort that we identified, but Mountain Pact doesn't have the capacity or bandwidth to dig in on it in this first quarter, let me know, and we're very much connected with a number of different groups in this arena and can connect you with them if you'd like to find some support or learn more about the efforts to affect change. So thank you very much for your participation or listening through this presentation. We are going to open it up for Q&A, and also, before I forget, we will be sending follow-up emails with the slides, a recording, as well as the spreadsheet listing out and expanding a little bit more on each of these policies. So let me open up the question box. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the question box or raise your hand. And we have one question from Keith Baker, who asked, do you have anything on Colorado delegation bill to allow good SAM abandoned mine mitigation? That is something we haven't been following. I'd be happy to look into that a little bit and get back to you with some more information on that. And let's see. We have a question from Steve Thompson of Whitefish, Montana. He says, more than half of the federal firefighting budget is dedicated to protecting homes on private lands in the wildland-urban interface. I'm concerned about this massive subsidies from federal taxpayers that serve to encourage people living in hazardous fire-prone areas that will become more hazardous with climate change. Money that goes to protecting homes located in hazardous WUI wildland-urban interface locations is money that doesn't go to conserve public forests or manage wildfire on public lands. I know that Headwaters Economics in Bozeman and others have some interesting ideas to remove this pervasive incentive to build homes in the wildland-urban interface. Does this reform bill supported by the Pact address this issue of moral hazards and unwise taxpayer subsidies? So great question, Steve. And we've definitely been, Headwaters Economics work on this has been one of the primary resources we've referred to on this in a number of, they're great research organization and think tank. So the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act is a financing bill, and so it doesn't go into this concept of moral hazard and wildland-urban interface subsidies, though I think it does make a critical first step in improving that situation, and that it would ensure that all of the funding that's currently going to these private lands or private properties on public lands and such. The funding that's going there won't be diverted from other programs that support forest conservation, forest restoration, wildfire, ahead of time thinning to prevent wildfires in the future. And so it's very much like a wonky budget bill, but it's a critical first step in at least ensuring that funding isn't taken away from essential land management activities. Question from Morgan Goodwin of Truckee, California. He asks, for the 100% clean effort, is that for electricity or for all emissions? So for that is the I Am Pro Snow 100% committed campaign. As I understand it, it is for municipal electricity. And I know we have Aspen and Park City have been engaged in these conversations as well. If either of you wanted to raise your hand and share a little bit more about your work with them. But as I understand it, is for municipal electricity. So Todd Brown of Telluride asks if there's a smaller focus emphasis in terms of all of these priorities we listed. And so I know it's a long list that can be a little bit overwhelming. Our goal with presenting this is to give you the information so that a town like Telluride or Truckee could decide on if one of these in particular stands out to you, and it's something the Mountain Pact isn't currently working on. At least you have the information to begin thinking about engaging in that dialogue. In the Mountain Pact, we're the ones we decide to campaign on. So the ones that we're actually reaching out to you about press statements or sign-on letters, etc. Those are the ones that we deem the most highest potential for impact, where we think we can actually shift the needle. For example, we made that decision last year with the coal royalty reform issue, and as we've seen this year, there has been significant reforms made, and local government electeds have played a huge role in that. And then they're also the ones that we think would be most relevant to mountain communities, looking at that alongside the impact potential. And so that's kind of how we decide what we want to focus on, but I think the goal is to provide some abundance at the get-go, as overwhelming as it might be. But when you have all of this information, at least you, as local governments, have a sense of what the landscape looks like, and if any really call out to you, you can consider digging in, or I can connect you with others. Let's see. Do we have any other, let's give it a minute if anybody wants to plug in additional questions, or raise your hand if you'd like to be unmuted and ask your question. So a question from Ashley Pearl of Aspen. And she said, when the Mountain Pact was originally founded, we talked about getting member towns together in person or looking at ways we can better partner to have a collective voice. Are there plans in 2016 or interest from others in this approach? I realize I don't know a lot of the folks on this call, and so much could come from building relationships. So that's a fabulous question, Ashley. And we've explored that, the idea of getting communities together in person. We have attended a couple of the Colorado Association of Ski Towns meeting where people are already together, or hosted shoulder events to that. I think if it was something that seemed of interest and a number of towns were in a position where they would be able to actually meet in person, I think that would be something the Mountain Pact could definitely take on in terms of organizing. Concerns thus far, or reasons we haven't really dove into building something like this, is just funding restraints and for communities to be able to travel, and then also just the time to get everybody there, especially around an issue like climate, which usually isn't the top priority for a community. That said, if there is interest, we could maybe start with just a more casual conference call to get conversations going. But if this, I don't know, if anybody wants to just chat a message in the chat box, the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel, I'd be very interested if there is interest and people would be able to engage in it. And so while you're thinking about that, another question we have is from Karen Teddenham from Telluride, and she asked, where and how would we find out about the new BLM DOI leasing program that might affect our areas? And so in the email we're going to send a follow-up, or the spreadsheet, there will be links in there for more information. I think, in the very short term, I think if you Google it, there's a lot of information out there on both. But what we send as follow-up, there'll be more information on both the methane updates as well as the coal royalty reform. And then if you have any follow-up questions in addition to the sources, we'd be happy to talk through that with you. Another question we have from Keith of Buena Vista is the Mountain Pact open to counties? And if not, do you know of a similar organization for counties? So the Mountain Pact is, we're definitely interested in open to counties. We haven't focused in on counties so much. We did a little bit of outreach initially, met with some counties back in 2014, but just was a sort of a slower process in getting them engaged. And I think we're definitely interested in engaging counties, and it's a matter of when we'll have a capacity time to do that outreach. But if there's a particular county that you think would like to be a part of this policy discussion and engagement opportunities through the Mountain Pact, please let me know. And likewise with any other towns out there. We're always interested in engagement from different communities. And so Morgan Goodwin, council member from Truckee, California, just made a note that he'll be taking a road trip through Utah and Colorado in March and would love to meet with folks in Park City, Aspen, Breckenridge, and others on this subject. And so, Morgan, we should definitely talk, and I can put you and make introductions to folks in all of those communities and more. And Matt Abbott of Park City just noted as well that he is interested in a shared conversation, as Ashley suggested, from Aspen. So I'll think about this a little bit more and see what it might look like, and maybe have a follow-up conversation with you, Ashley, about what you're envisioning in terms of if something like a conference call would be a nice first step. Additionally, if we do, as we organize this delegation to DC in April, I know it's with elected officials more so than staff, but that would be at least an opportunity for those elected officials to get in the same room and have some conversations around shared interests and issues related to climate change in mountain communities. And thank you, Todd, for referencing that. Just pointing out that we are big fans of the Colorado Association of Ski Towns at the Mountain Pact. They share many of the goals and are encouraging communication across the West. And Colorado Association of Ski Towns, also called CAST, they meet quarterly. It is a great network that, for those of you who are not in Colorado, they actually do have a number of affiliate members outside of Colorado, including Jackson, Wyoming, Park City, Whistler. So if I encourage those of you who are interested in engaging. It's a great trade group, and they talk about a number of issues in addition to expanding beyond the environmental lens, but talking about housing issues that many of you are facing, et cetera. And so definitely check out CAST if you haven't heard about it yet. All right, so this is last call for questions. Oh, yep. And yeah, so I think thank you for the thoughtful questions. If more questions come up, feel free to contact us at the Mountain Pact anytime. my contact information is right here. Things can get busy, and it's really great to carve out some time to just have a check-in conversation. I had that with Todd and Greg of Telluride earlier this week, and it's just a chance to share and talk through any of your specific interests for your community and talk through a lot of that. So contact us anytime. I appreciate your interest. We are planning to do this quarterly webinar, every quarter. And so I think it'll be a mix as we move into doing the one perhaps in April of maybe we'll be digging into a couple more updated policies rather than a high-level overview, because a lot of these won't change, I imagine, but stay tuned on that. We'll also be sending a follow-up email with more information on the ski area water rights, Forest Service Directive update, as well as some information on the DC trip in April. And then, of course, we'll be sending a follow-up to this, specific to this webinar, to each of the attendees on the recording, the slides, and a spreadsheet with more information. All right, so with that, I think we can close it out, and appreciate your participation, your interest. Thank you so much, and look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.